Hello students, it's me teacher Ira, and for today we will be unlocking a new learning for you. We will be discussing about read intensively to determine the author's purposes. So sit back, relax, and have fun learning with me. And for our learning objectives, for our knowledge, analyze the different purposes of authors in writing through oral discussion. For our skills, categorize excerpt from various literary texts based on the author's purposes in writing. And for our attitude, justify an author's purposes in writing through text analysis. So before we will start with our discussion, I want you to answer this activity entitled What. So I will give you 2 minutes to do this activity. So class, your timer starts now. Okay, time's up. Okay, so now I will ask you a following questions based on the activity that you did. So, how did you find the activity? Yes, Miss Handog? Okay, very good. So, what do you think are the different author's purposes in writing? Okay, who have any idea? Okay, very good. So, what do you expect to learn with our topic today? Yes? Okay, very good. So our topic today will be focusing on the writer's purposes. So we will be identifying what is the purposes of our authors in writing. So what is writer's purposes? So when we say a writer's purposes, it is simply what it says on the tin. It's a considerations of what the author of a particular text was intending when they wrote it, and how they wanted the reader to feel when reading, or what reactions they wanted to encourage. So when we say writer's purpose, it is also included here the emotions, the physical emotions of the reader when they read a particular text from the author's story or writings. So the purpose of writing is to entertain, inform, persuade, and etc. It has a direct impact on the language features used by the author. So there are different purposes of the authors in terms of writing. So first, we will be discussed to persuade. Using this form of author's purpose, the author tries to sway the reader and make them agree with their opinion, declarations, or stances. So from the meaning that I give, it talks about to make the readers agree with what the author's or trying to say or intended to say to his readers. So the goal is to convince the reader and make them act in a specific way. To convince a reader to believe a concept or to take a specific course of actions, the authors back the idea with facts, proof, and examples. So, in a way to the authors to make the readers believe of what he's intended to his text is he needs to provide a examples or proof that will support to his text. And also, authors have to be creative with their persuasive writing. For instance, apart from form commentary facts and example, the authors has to borrow some forms of entertaining elements and amuse the readers. This makes their writing enjoyable and relatable to some extent, increasingly the likelihood of persuading people to take the required course of actions. Of course, when you do persuasive writing, it is important that you will be creative so that you will be able to catch the attention of your readers. So another purpose of writing is to inform. So when we say to inform, when the author's purpose is to inform or teach the reader, they use expository writing. The author attempts to teach objectively by showing or explaining facts. So when you look at informative writing and persuasive writing, you can identify the common theme, the use of facts. However, the two forms of the author's purposes use these facts differently. So there are different uses. There are different uses of the informative writing and the persuasive writing. So unlike persuasive writing, which uses facts is to convince the reader, the informative writing uses fact to educate the reader about the particular subject. So in persuasive writing, when they uses facts, proof, or example, they are convincing the reader to believe with their text. While in the informative writing, when they uses facts, it is to make the readers to educate about a particular subject. With persuasive writing, it's like there's a catch, the call to action. But in informative writing, only uses facts to educate the reader, not to convince them to take a specific course of actions. So the difference between the persuasive writing and the informative writing is the persuasive writing, the readers are trying to convince his or her readings, while in the informative writing, the author are educating his or her reader. So another author's purposes is to entertain. So most fictions book are written to entertain the reader, and yes, including the horror. On the other hand, non-fiction works combine an entertaining element with informative writing. So to entertain, the author tries to keep things as interesting as possible by coming up with fascinating characters, exciting plots, thrilling storylines, and sharp dialogues. So most narratives, poetry, and plays are written to entertain. Be that as it may, these works of fictions can also be persuasive or informative, but with fuse values and ideas, changing the reader's perspective becomes an easier task. So nonetheless, the entertaining purposes has to dominate, or else readers are going to lose interest quickly and the informative purpose will be defeated. So in entertaining. So when we say entertaining, like for example, the story of in Wattpad books. So there are a lot of Wattpad books or Wattpad stories that the stories are very entertaining based on how the authors want to catch the attention of his or her readers based on how he made his story enjoyable and creatively. So another purpose in author's purposes is to explain. So when the author's purpose is to explain, they write with the intent of telling the reader how to do something or giving details on how something works. This type of writing is about teaching a method or a process, and the text contains an explanations that teach readers how a particular process works or the procedure required to do or create something. So explain. It is very understandable. One of the like for example, when you write a on how to cook. So when you are the author, when you write on how to cook, it you need to explain the step by step procedure on how to cook that particular food. Um it So here in explaining, the author's purpose is they write the intent of telling the reader on how to do something, or by giving details, exact details on how to do that something, on how to work that something. So another author's purpose is to describe. So when describing the author's purpose, the author uses words to complement images in describing something. This type of writing attempts to give a more detailed descriptions of something, a bit a bit more detailed than the thousand words that pictures paints. So the writer uses adjectives and images to make the reader feels as though it were their own sensory experiences. So um, here in the last author's purpose, which is to describe, the authors uses words to complement images. So like for example, when you want to describe a flower, you will not just present present a flower. You will in order to make your reader more uh, more more attentive with your work. So when you're describing a particular, for example, flower, you will use a magic words, or like for example, this flower is very fascinating, is blooming. So that is the example in the last author's purposes to describe. So that is the five author's purposes in writing. First, we have to persuade, to inform, to entertain, to explain, and to describe. So, do you have any clarification class with our discussion today based on the um, five author's purposes in writing? So, did you understand the author's purposes of writing? Okay, very good. Since now we are done with our discussion, I have prepared here an activity, a graphic organizer collaborative activity. So you will do this in 15 minutes, and 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 this activity is by group. So I want you to group yourself first. For group, just count 1 to 4. Okay, let's start with you, Miss Hadlog. Okay, so now we go to your group. So I want you to make this activity silently and collaboratively. So here's the instructions. Categorize excerpts from various literary texts based on the author's purpose in writing, whether it be to inform, entertain, explain, persuade, or describe through a graphic organizer. Okay, are you done, class? Okay, so I will give you 1 minute to finish your works. And after you finish your work, we will be you will explain that in front of your classmates. Okay, time's up. Ball pens up. Okay, you may now take it down. So as you done your activity, um, I want each group to explain that in front of the class. So let's start with the group one. Okay, very good. So let's move on to the group two. Very good, group two. Now let's move on to the group three. Okay, very good. Now let's move on with our last group, group four. Okay, very good. Good job, students. So you already understand the author's purposes the author's purposes in writing. So what are the 5 purposes again? To inform, entertain, explain, persuade, describe. Very good. So let's give a hand with ourselves, everyone. Okay, good job. So from the activity that you have done, um, based on the activity and the discussion that we have done today, how does your understanding of the author's purposes of writing enhance your reading experiences and interpretation of the text? So may have the idea of Miss Kabunag. Okay, very good. How about the idea of Miss Bedro? Okay, very good. Last, may I have the idea of Mr. Pahulas? Okay, very good, students. So you already understand the author's purposes. I'm glad that you already have an idea, a knowledge about the author's purposes. Okay, very good, everyone. Good job. So now let's move on with our assessment. So I will give you 10 minutes to do this activity. So this activity entitled Purpose Identifications. So here's the instructions. The students will read a poem and determine the author's purpose in writing by citing lines and evidences from the text to support their claim. So I will give you the piece of paper of the text that you will determine. So the title of this poem is To Whom I Should Speak Today by Thomas Eric Pitt. So once you receive the piece of paper, you can now start your activity. And by the way, this is an individual activity, okay? So do this activity honestly and correctly. Honestly and correctly. So once you receive, you can now start. So, so I will give you 10 minutes to do this activity, class. You can now start. Okay, you have 2 minutes left to do your activity. $30 left. Okay, time's up. Finish or not finish, pass your paper to the center aisle and forward in front. Because I will collect your paper and check your paper. Okay? So now I already have your paper. So for your assignment, class, so look for any literary text in the internet and identify the author's purpose of writing. Make sure to cite evidences from the text to support your claim. So just put it in a one whole sheet of paper. Okay, that's all for today. I hope you have learned a lot from our discussion about the intended or the writer's purposes. So thank you so much. God bless everyone and keep safe. So class dismissed.